Poor girl, to Millionaire, why help me? His answer will melt your heart. The night was merciless, with rain pouring down in endless sheets that blurred the streetlights into hazy orange smears, and the wind howled through the narrow alleys like a beast searching for prey. On the roadside, under one flickering lamp, sat Anna, drenched to the bone, her thin clothes clinging to her shivering body as if mocking her helplessness. Her hair, heavy with rain, clung to her cheeks, hiding the hollow look in her eyes that had grown accustomed to being overlooked by the world. She clutched a torn bag tightly against her chest, not because it held anything precious, but because it was the last fragment of familiarity she had. People hurried by, their umbrellas and raincoats shielding them from the storm, not even sparing a glance at the fragile girl huddled in the corner. To them, she was invisible, a shadow in the rain, a ghost of poverty they didn't want to acknowledge. Hunger gnawed at her stomach like a cruel enemy that never left, twisting and turning inside her until she pressed her palm against it, trying in vain to ease the ache. Her lips trembled from the cold, her breath coming out in faint clouds, and in a whisper drowned by thunder she muttered to herself, "Maybe tonight I won't have to wake up again." The puddles around her rippled as raindrops crashed into them, splattering her worn shoes with mud, making them feel even heavier. Above, the lamp flickered once more, casting her into shadow, then into light, as though the world couldn't decide whether she was meant to exist or vanish. Her eyelids grew heavy, her body swaying slightly, sleep threatening to take her even if the ground beneath her was cold and merciless. Just when surrender seemed inevitable, a deep hum pierced through the storm, the sound of an engine, smooth and commanding, unlike the rattling cars and impatient bikes she was used to hearing on these streets. Slowly she raised her head, her weary eyes squinting through the rain as two beams of light cut through the darkness. A sleek black car approached, its polished surface gleaming despite the downpour, a machine far too perfect for this broken part of the city. Anna's heart jolted. Luxury cars did not belong here, where despair reigned supreme. The car slowed, tires splashing water aside, until it stopped directly before her. The engine cut off, leaving a strange silence, broken only by the rain hammering against metal and ground. Her pulse quickened in her chest as the door clicked open. From inside stepped a tall figure, moving with a grace that contrasted the chaos of the storm. His shoes landed on the wet ground, ripples spreading outwards, his long coat shielding him from the rain. He straightened slowly, his posture calm, confident, almost regal, but there was a heaviness about him that the storm could not disguise. Anna shrank back, pulling her bag closer, her body tensing, unsure if she should flee or stay. For a moment she thought perhaps he hadn't even noticed her, perhaps he was simply checking directions. Yet when he raised his head, his eyes found her instantly. Even through the veil of rain, his gaze locked onto hers, steady and searching, not dismissive, not cold, but strangely human. Anna froze, her breath caught in her throat, her fingers tightening on the strap of her bag until her knuckles turned white. He took a slow step forward, then another, his movements deliberate, the sound of his footsteps strangely louder than the storm itself. Each step made her heartbeat pound harder until she felt it echo in her ears. She wanted to run, but her legs refused to obey. He stopped just beneath the flickering lamp, and for the first time she saw his face clearly. Strong lines framed by shadows, a man harder, Ned by experience, yet his eyes carried a softness, a depth that unsettled her more than anger ever could. They studied each other in silence, the storm raging around them, thunder rolling in the distance, and yet for Anna it felt as if the world had narrowed to just this moment. Why had he stopped? Why had this man, so clearly from another world, chosen to stand before her when all others had rushed past as though she were nothing? The question burned in her mind, louder than the rain, heavier than her hunger. And in that fragile silence, as the storm continued to rage, Anna's fate shifted, though she did not yet know it. Who was this stranger, and why had he stopped for her when everyone else ignored her? The silence stretched between them, thick and fragile, as Anna sat trembling under the storm while the stranger's eyes bore into hers, not with coldness, but with something she could not name. Slowly, almost as if careful not to startle her, the man reached into the back seat of his car and returned with a small packet wrapped neatly in paper. Steam still rose faintly from it, carrying the unmistakable scent of fresh bread and soup, a fragrance that struck Anna like a wave because she had not smelled warmth in food for days. He crouched slightly so that he was not towering over her, his polished coat brushing against the wet ground, and extended the parcel toward her open palms. Anna froze, her fingers twitching, her heart screaming at her to grab it, yet her pride and fear locked her in place. Was this real, or some cruel test from the world? The man's hand remained steady, the packet of food resting there as rain dotted the paper, and still he said nothing. At last, hunger overcame hesitation, and Anna reached out, her trembling hands brushing against his as she accepted the food. The moment her skin touched his, a strange warmth passed through her body, a reminder that she was still alive, that kindness had not entirely vanished from the world. She unwrapped it slowly, the smell nearly making her dizzy, and took a cautious bite. The bread melted on her tongue, and her eyes filled with tears, not just from relief, but from the sudden flood of emotions she had buried under hunger and despair. She whispered a faint thank you, but her voice was drowned by the storm, and she was not sure if he even heard. The man, however, reached once more into the car and returned with a black umbrella, large and sturdy, opening it with a swift motion that shielded her from the relentless rain. He held it carefully above her head, angling it so she stayed dry while the rain poured mercilessly over his own shoulders. Anna's eyes darted up, confusion and disbelief mixing in her gaze. No one had ever cared enough to get wet just so she could stay dry. She hesitated again, clutching the bread in her lap before whispering the words that had been burning in her heart. Why would a millionaire help a nobody like me? Her voice cracked, fragile, almost lost in the sound of thunder. She had not meant to say it aloud, but the question escaped like a wound that could no longer remain hidden. The man's hand, holding the umbrella steady, trembled for the briefest moment, and in that instant, Anna noticed something strange in his eyes. It wasn't arrogance, it wasn't pity, but something deeper, something that looked like sorrow pressed into the depths of his soul. His jaw tightened as though he was fighting the urge to speak, as though her words had pierced a memory buried deep inside him. His eyes softened again, glistening faintly under the flickering lamplight, but his lips did not move. The silence became heavier than the rain, heavier than her hunger, heavier than the weight she had carried all her life. Anna leaned forward slightly, desperate for an answer. But the man only looked away for a brief moment, as if gathering himself against emotions. Too heavy to let out, his silence was louder than thunder, and it unsettled her even more than any harsh word could. Why did he hesitate? What was he hiding behind those eyes that carried both strength and pain? She clutched the bread tighter, her heart racing, wondering if the gift in her lap came from kindness, from guilt, or from something much more complicated. The umbrella shielded her body, but his silence left her soul exposed. Anna lowered her gaze, biting her lip, afraid she had said too much, afraid she had offended the only person who had stopped for her in this endless night. But when she looked up again, his eyes were already back on her, steady, intense, filled with something she could not define. Compassion, yes, but also a shadow of a past he was not ready to reveal. The storm raged on around them, lightning slicing the sky, and Anna's question still lingered unanswered in the air, hanging between them like a fragile thread waiting to snap. And as his silence stretched, Anna realized that whatever he carried inside him was not simple charity. There was a story behind his eyes, a wound behind his kindness, and for reasons she could not yet understand, he was not ready to tell it. The question echoed in her chest like a drumbeat. Why would a millionaire help a nobody like her? And though he stood right beside her, The mystery of his silence left her feeling as if she had stepped into a world of secrets far deeper than the storm around them. His hand tightened imperceptibly on the umbrella handle, his gaze fixed on her face, as if searching for something, as if seeing more in her than she knew was there. Yet still, his lips did not part, his answer locked inside him. And Anna sat in the cold night, her heart pounding, her mind swirling with fear and hope, knowing that the stranger's gift had changed everything, but that his silence hid more than she could yet imagine. David looks at her with a strange pain in his eyes, but doesn't answer. Why is he hiding something? The silence between them grew heavier by the second, the rain still hammering down on the umbrella above Anna's head, while David stood beside her, unmoving, his eyes locked on hers, as though fighting a storm of his own. The flickering streetlight cast shifting shadows across his face, revealing fleeting glimpses of both strength and sorrow, and Anna, though shivering, could not look away. The unanswered question still burned in her chest, gnawing at her like hunger itself. But before she could summon the courage to ask again, David finally inhaled sharply, breaking the unbearable stillness. His voice came low, roughened by something deeper than the cold, and the words seemed to tremble on the edge of confession. "You remind me of someone," he murmured, his gaze dropping briefly as though the memory was too heavy to face head-on. Anna's breath caught instantly, her heart slamming against her ribs, because in that moment she realized his silence had not been born of indifference, but of pain. She leaned closer without thinking, the bread still clutched tightly in her hands, her wet hair sticking to her face as she tried to catch every syllable he spoke. The sound of his voice carried a strange weight, like it belonged to another time, another life, one she could not see but felt hovering in the shadows around him. His eyes flickered toward her again, then away, and Anna noticed how his jaw tightened, as though forcing himself to speak about something he had long tried to bury. The rain pounded harder against the streets, creating rivers along the pavement, but beneath the thin roof of the bus shelter where they sat, time felt frozen. Anna swallowed hard, her voice barely audible, but she dared to whisper, "Who?" Her single word lingered in the damp air, trembling, filled with both fetishes and curiosity, yet David did not answer right away. Instead, he pressed his lips together, his throat working as if the name he wanted to say had claws and would tear him apart if he let it out. His fingers curled around the umbrella handle until his knuckles whitened, and his gaze drifted into the distance, far beyond the storm, into some memory Anna could not follow. Lightning cracked across the sky, illuminating his face for a split second, and in that instant Anna saw something raw. Grief, deep and unhealed, carved into the lines around his eyes. She leaned in further, the dampness of the shelter pressing around them, her voice firmer now, though still soft. "Please, tell me, who do I remind you of?" David's breath trembled, and he turned toward her, their eyes locking again. And for a heartbeat, Anna felt as though she stood at the edge of a story larger than her own suffering. She could see the way his chest rose and fell, uneven, the way his mouth opened and closed again, as if the words betrayed him. The compassion she had felt in his silence now had a shape, the shadow of a person she had never met, but whose absence still haunted this man standing before her. Anna's mind raced, possibilities flooding her thoughts. Was it a daughter he had lost, a sister, someone he had loved and failed to protect? The way he looked at her wasn't empty. It was full, overflowing with something he could not yet give voice to. He exhaled slowly, the sound shaky, and finally spoke again, though barely above a whisper. "Someone I can never forget." The words lingered, heavy and unfinished, and Anna's grip on her bag tightened as chills ran down her spine. The storm outside thundered as though echoing the gravity of his confession, and the air between them grew dense, each second stretching longer, each heartbeat louder. She felt her body inch closer on its own, as though she might fall into the truth hidden in his eyes. But he stopped there, refusing to go further, his gaze shifting away again, this time toward the ground, the weight of unspoken memories pinning his shoulders. Anna could almost feel the presence of that unseen figure, someone whose absence had carved this silence into him, someone whose shadow had just touched her life. Her lips trembled, her throat aching to press him again. But something in his expression warned her that the answer, when it came, would not be easy to hear. She bit down gently on her lower lip, her chest heaving with both fear and anticipation, because though he had finally spoken, the mystery only deepened. And as the rain poured relentlessly, washing the world around them, Anna's heart whispered a single burning question that refused to let go. Who was this person she reminded him of? And could it be someone he had once loved and lost forever? Who is this person she reminds him of? Could it be someone he lost? The storm pressed harder against the fragile shelter, raindrops drumming a relentless rhythm above their heads, and Anna sat frozen, her heart racing after David's unfinished words, her eyes clinging to his face as if the truth would reveal itself in the lines of his silence, until at last, after what felt like an eternity, he drew in a shaky breath and let the weight he carried slip from his lips. His voice cracked, not with weakness, but with the raw memory of a man stripped bare by his past. Years ago, he began slowly, his eyes distant, his tone laced with both shame and gratitude. I was not standing beside a car like that one. I was sitting where you sit now. Anna blinked rapidly, her brows knitting together, struggling to connect the image of the well-dressed, confident man before her with the broken, hungry girl she saw reflected in her own shadow. You? She whispered, disbelieving, the word nearly drowned out by the thunder that rolled across the sky. David's lips pulled into a faint, bitter smile, not of pride, but of remembering pain too vividly, and he nodded. Yes, I know what it is to starve, to freeze, to believe the world has no place for you. I was younger than you are now, but the streets were just as cruel. I begged, I searched for scraps, and every door slammed in my face. I thought I would die out there. His voice grew quieter as the memory unfolded, and Anna's chest tightened as though she could feel the echoes of his hunger inside her own body. One night, when the rain was colder than this, when I had nothing left to fight with, a stranger stopped. He didn't ask who I was, didn't ask if I deserved it, didn't treat me as less. He handed me bread, gave me shelter, and told me something I will never forget. Kindness is never wasted. That night changed everything. It was the seed that grew into the life you see now. Anna's fingers trembled around the half-eaten piece of bread she still held, her eyes wide, her throat tight, because the man she had believed to be untouchable, a millionaire wrapped in mystery, was confessing that he too had once lived in the same shadows she knew too well. Lightning flashed across the street, illuminating his face, and she saw in his expression not pity but recognition, a mirror of her own despair from hours before. I can't believe it, Anna whispered, her voice breaking. You were like me. David's eyes softened, pain and strength woven together as he nodded again. Exactly like you. The only difference is someone chose to stop for me when everyone else passed me by. The rain seemed to hush for a moment, or maybe it was simply that Anna's mind had fallen silent, her heart pounding so loudly that it drowned out everything else. She had never considered that wealth could be built on a past of suffering, that the man who now stood above her with such power had once crouched in gutters, unseen and unwanted. Her breath came shallow, and she felt an ache in her chest that was not just hunger but awe, confusion, and a fragile kind of hope. David's gaze locked onto hers, steady now, as though the act of sharing his truth had steadied him. But beneath his calm, she caught another flicker of something unresolved, something more personal than his general story of survival. She wanted to ask, wanted to press further, but her lips parted only in silence, because there was something in his eyes that warned her not everything had been revealed yet. "So you see," he continued softly, "I help because I was helped. I give because once I had nothing. And if that stranger had not stopped, I would not be here, and I would not have the chance to change another life." His words fell heavy between them, carried by the rain and the night, and Anna's heart swelled with emotions she could not untangle. Gratitude, disbelief, admiration, and the strange sense that fate had woven their paths together for a reason. She swallowed hard, her voice shaking as she asked the question that burned deeper than all the others. "But why me? Out of all the people in this world you could help, why stop for me tonight?" The silence that followed was sharper than any thunderclap, because though David had unburdened his past, he did not immediately answer this. His eyes darkened with that same strange pain she had glimpsed before, and his grip on the umbrella handle tightened once more. He opened his mouth, then closed it again, as though the truth perched on the edge of his tongue but refused to be spoken. Anna leaned forward, her pulse racing, every nerve in her body demanding an answer. But instead of words, David lowered his gaze to the slick pavement, the rain reflecting his shadow in distorted ripples. Something about the way he held himself, the way his shoulders sank under an invisible weight, told her there was more, something deeper, something that tied her existence to his in ways she could not yet understand. And as the storm raged on, the question hung in the air, sharper and heavier than before. Why had David chosen her, specifically her, when countless others suffered in silence? But why is David helping her specifically? Is there more to this connection? The storm had not eased, but in that fragile pocket of silence after her question, David reached into the inner pocket of his coat, his movements deliberate, as if the decision weighed heavier than gold, and when his hand emerged he was holding a single card, crisp and white despite the damp air, its edges sharp under the glow of the flickering streetlight. Anna's eyes locked onto it, her breath hitching, because in the bleakness of her night, that small object seemed to radiate more power than the car parked at the curb or the umbrella shielding her head. David extended it toward her, his gaze steady though shadowed by an unspoken burden, and his voice, calm yet carrying the force of a promise, cut through the pounding rain. "Come tomorrow, if you truly want to change your life." The words struck Anna's heart like a bolt of lightning, not in their volume, but in their impossible weight, because they offered something she had not dared to believe in for so long: choice. She stared at the card, her fingers trembling as she reached out, almost afraid to touch it, as if the moment she did, the universe might laugh and snatch it away. Her skin brushed the cool surface, and when at last she clutched it in her hand, she felt the ridges press against her palm like proof that this was real. The card felt heavier than it should, as though it carried not just his offer, but the weight of destiny itself. Anna's throat tightened, her lips parting, but words refused to come, because how could she express the flood of fear and fragile hope crashing inside her all at once? She looked at David, desperate to read his eyes, to see if this was pity disguised as kindness, or a trap dressed in generosity. But what she found instead was something unsettlingly steady, compassion laced with a pain she still didn't understand. She wanted to believe him, wanted to believe that someone like him, Kosa, would see her, help her, guide her towards something beyond the endless nights of hunger and rain, but the scars of betrayal and rejection clawed at her memory. She gripped the card tighter, so tightly her knuckles ached, and she whispered a silent prayer that this was not another cruel trick of fate. David said nothing more, only studied her face as if committing it to memory, his silence speaking louder than 1,000 promises. The rain echoed like applause on the roof above, yet inside Anna a storm raged louder, torn between the intoxicating glimpse of a future and the suffocating grip of fear. What if she went, only to find herself humiliated, cast out, reminded once again that the world had no place for her? What if this was a test she wasn't strong enough to pass? She felt her chest tighten as doubt crept in, wrapping around her heart like chains, but at the same time, the memory of David's confession pressed back against the darkness. He too had once been broken, hungry, forgotten. If anyone understood her pain, it was him. She lifted her gaze from the card to his face, trying to draw strength from the steadiness of his presence, but the unanswered question gnawed at her. Why her? Why had he stopped? And why now? David seemed to sense her unspoken battle, for he simply nodded once, as if to say he would not force her, that the choice was hers alone, and then he stepped back, the umbrella tilting slightly, rain slipping onto his shoulder, but ignored. The card felt like a lifeline in her grip, yet also like a burden, because it demanded that she choose, demanded that she gamble the last fragments of her trust on a man she barely knew. Her breath shook, and her heart pounded so loudly she wondered if he could hear it, and though she wanted to speak, to ask what awaited her if she came, the words tangled on her tongue. David turned slightly toward the car, his silence pressing heavier with each second, as if leaving her with the decision was more powerful than any further promise he could make. Anna felt the world tilt. Her body pulled between running toward the safety of what she knew, even if that meant cold streets and empty nights, or stepping into a path shrouded in mystery, guided only by the fragile hope flickering in her chest. Her damp fingers curled around the card again and again, as if reassuring herself it was real, and yet with each squeeze, the fear inside her screamed louder. Lightning split the sky and she flinched, the flash reflecting off the card like a sign from above, though whether it was a warning or an invitation she could not tell. She forced herself to glance once more at David, searching for certainty in his face, but he offered none, only that same silent expectation, as if he had already given her all he could for tonight. Anna's throat burned, her lips pressed tight, and tears threatened to spill, though she refused to let them, not now. She had lived too long in shadows to crumble in front of him, yet the truth was undeniable. This man had placed the future in her hands, and for the first time in years, the path ahead was not just survival, but possibility. She drew a shaky breath, the card pressed against her chest as though she could anchor her trembling soul to it, and inside her, the war raged on. Hope whispering of transformation, fear screaming of betrayal, both tearing her apart until she thought she might shatter. And as David opened the car door, pausing only to glance back at her with eyes that carried secrets she could not yet name, the question blazed brighter than ever in her mind. Would she trust him enough to show up tomorrow, or would she let the familiar embrace of fear chain her to the streets forever? Will Anna trust him enough to show up, or will she let her fears keep her in the streets? The night gave way to dawn, and though Anna had barely slept, her trembling hands clutched the card all the way through the rest. Less hours, every second dragging her toward the moment of decision. And as the sun rose, she found herself walking through unfamiliar streets, her heart pounding like a drum against her ribs, fear and hope warring inside her with every step until finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached the tall building marked with the address written on the card. She paused at the entrance, her breath shallow, her legs heavy as though the very ground tried to pull her back into the shadows she had always known. But then she looked up and saw him, David, standing at the doorway not as a stranger passing through the night, but as someone who had been waiting for her, his posture calm, his gaze steady, as though he had known she would come despite the doubts tearing her apart. Anna's lips parted, but no words emerged. Instead, she clutched the straps of her worn bag and stepped closer, her footsteps echoing softly against the stone, every sound reminding her this was not a dream. David's expression softened when he saw her, the faintest smile breaking through the solemnity of his face, and without hesitation, he held out a bundle wrapped in clean cloth, fresh clothes folded neatly inside, the kind of simple kindness that struck Anna harder than diamonds ever could. Her throat tightened as she reached out, her fingers brushing the fabric, and tears pricked her eyes, not because of vanity or comfort, but because in that small gesture, she felt the dignity she thought she had lost forever being returned to her. "These are for you," David said gently, his voice low but steady, as though he understood the enormity of what this moment meant to her, and Anna nodded quickly, unable to speak, afraid that if she opened her mouth, the sobs swelling in her chest would pour out uncontrollably. He stepped aside then, opening the door behind him, and a wave of warmth drifted into the cool morning air, carrying the scent of food so rich and comforting that Anna nearly staggered with longing. Inside, the light glowed golden against polished floors, a stark contrast to the wet streets she had walked, and for a moment she froze, her mind screaming that she did not belong in a place like this, that she was still the girl of the gutters, dirty and forgotten. But David's hand rested lightly against the doorframe, his quiet presence urging her forward without force, and so she stepped across the threshold, her breath catching as the warmth wrapped around her body, washing away the night's chill like a blanket woven of hope. On a table just inside, plates of food waited, steaming, fragrant, and Anna's knees nearly buckled at the sight, her body aching with hunger, but her soul overwhelmed by something far deeper. This was not mere charity. This was an invitation into a life where her existence mattered. Her tears spilled freely now, hot against her cheeks, and she pressed a hand to her mouth as if to hold back the flood of emotions rushing through her. David closed the door gently behind her, his footsteps calm, and when she turned to him, clutching the clothes against her chest, she saw in his eyes the answer to the question that had haunted her since the night they met. Why would a man of wealth and power stop for someone like her? He did not speak the answer in grand words, did not deliver speeches about destiny or fate. Instead, he showed her in the simplest, most profound way that his kindness was not pity but recognition, that he believed in passing forward the gift that once saved him, and that he saw her not as a beggar, not as a burden, but as a human being deserving of a chance at life. The tears that fell from Anna's eyes were no longer born of despair, but of gratitude so deep it shook her to her core. Gratitude that someone had chosen not just to see her, but to lift her, to give her more than food or shelter, to give her dignity, hope, and a place in a world that had long shut her out. She whispered a thank you, broken, trembling, but filled with more sincerity than any words she had ever spoken. And David only nodded softly, as though he already understood what her heart struggled to express. As she looked around the room, taking in the small signs of welcome, the folded clothes, the warm meal, the simple space prepared for her within his foundation, Anna realized her life had already begun to change the moment she had chosen to trust, the moment she had walked through that door despite her fear. The shadows of the streets no longer clung to her as chains, but as scars that told a story of survival, scars that now would be met not with shame, but with healing. She wept openly, her shoulders shaking, and in her tears was the release of years of silence, rejection, and invisibility, replaced now by the dawning truth that she was no longer alone. David placed a hand lightly on her shoulder, steady, reassuring, and in that touch she felt the weight of his own past, the boy he had once been, the hunger he had once endured, the stranger who had saved him. And she understood in that moment that his answer to her question had never been about words. It had always been about this, about creating a new beginning not just for her, but for every soul who walked the path he once had. And as she stood in the light of his foundation, clothes pressed to her chest, food waiting to fill her hunger, tears streaming down her face in rivers of gratitude, Anna knew with absolute certainty that one man's kindness had not just saved her. It had rewritten her destiny, turning her question into a truth she could carry forever. That compassion, when given freely, could change everything. His answer to her question wasn't just words. It was a new life,